I really like Janai Alman's definition because it's just so short and sweet. And I don't think she ever wrote it somewhere. I think it was like on Instagram in a story or something like that.
Oh, wow.
But it's just using God's words to dehumanize God's beloved.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
so short and sweet because there are plenty of like long definitions I could
Yeah.
give you, like misusing or manipulating scripture to influence or control your emotions, thoughts, or behavior. Instead of ministering love and care with grace and truth, they manipulate, domineer, bully, gaslight, intimidate, condemn, shame. It's the holding on to power and control by those in spiritual authority rather than serving with grace and humility.
Welcome to 3%. We're your hosts, Jamie Hay.
And I'm Blake Roberts.
We're two best friends, fathers, husbands, and just two guys trying to figure it out.
We're also therapists, which is probably a pretty important part.
That's true.
And we believe that at our best, people are 97% honest with themselves and others. And it's that hidden 3% of emotions, needs, desires, and behaviors that we keep to ourselves that keep us bound to shame and loneliness, from which many of our issues stem.
Each week on this podcast, we'll interview leaders in the fields of psychology, theology, arts, and athletics to explore holistic masculinity. We're not here to tell you the man you need to be, but we are here to help you explore what gets in the way of being the man you want to be.
We're going to help you develop courage and give you the tools to share your 3% in the relationships that matter most so you can more deeply connect with yourself, God, and others. So, pull up a chair.
Let's get into it.
So let's be honest. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Let's be honest.
Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the 3% podcast. Today is going to be a really good conversation. It might be a heavy conversation, just given the context of what we'll be talking about.
So buckle up.
So buckle up. Brian, I've said that unintentionally like three or four
I've heard.
times. So yeah, we need to get a t-shirt maybe with buckle up on it.
I think so.
Anyways, we have Brian Lee on the show today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because Brian is doing some really courageous and important work around spiritual abuse, and something that is not talked about as much as it should be, and that impacts so many people. And so we're really grateful for Brian to be here today. Brian is a pastor, coach, a speaker, a survivor of spiritual abuse and religious trauma. And since leaving his vocational ministry in 2021, he's been working to provide recovery and resources for other fellow victims and survivors. And he's worked with churches and organizations, and he's started a pretty amazing nonprofit, I believe, called Broken to Beloved, which exists to help victims and survivors of spiritual abuse, religious trauma, and church harm, to offer practical pathways toward healing and wholeness by providing resources for recovery. And I'll let him talk a little bit more about what Broken to Beloved offers, because it's a really rich community that I've seen from afar and have been really encouraged by the work Brian is doing. So Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. We always like to start by asking our guest, how would you define holistic, healthy masculinity?
It's such an interesting question. I love that you say holistic. And for me, that word means integrity, right? That Latin root, I think it is, for integrity is the idea of being whole. And so the idea of being undivided. And I think so often, at least growing up in the 80s and 90s, you're taught that being a man means setting some parts of yourself aside, or shutting this one behind a door, or stuffing this one away, or repressing or pretending or ignoring that this part doesn't exist. And so for me, a healthy, holistic masculinity means, can I bring together all of these parts into one unified thing that doesn't necessarily have to put on display all of those parts, but I also don't have to pretend they don't exist. right? And we hear so often that you can't tame what you can't name. And so can I name all of these distinct parts? Can I bring them together and say, yeah, this is a really scary part of me, or this is a part that I really don't like, but it's still part of me. And, part of the work that we do at Broken to Beloved is this idea of healing and wholeness. And so for us, that's what the wholeness part means. And one of our values is that we hold to the belief that we have a goodness over wickedness. And that's like a Genesis 1-2 theology over a Genesis 3 theology. That when we were created with the intent of being very good. Not wicked, not depraved, not sinful. Can we be those things? Are we those things? Sure. But that wasn't the original intent. It was very good. So can I learn to see myself in that light and pull myself back together as a unified whole and as a unified self that says, yep, I've got all these parts. Some of them look really macho. Some of them look really masculine. Some of them look really feminine. Some of them look really sad. Some of them look, all these different things. And all of them are part of me. And that's okay. And that's good.
Beautiful. Spot on. I told you he would be
I know. I love
the
that.
perfect guest for the show.
I also love that it's kind of a newer thing for us to begin the interviews by just very overtly asking that question. And every time we've asked it, I've just been like, wow, the answers are just so helpful and meaningful. I'm curious a little more about your background, Brian, and how that informs. We definitely want to get to what is Broken to Beloved. How is that shaping how you engage with people now? But I kind of want to know what led to the point that you wanted to create this nonprofit.
Yeah, those feel like two really different questions for me, because the way you started with how did you get here and your background is the whole story piece, right? Of how did I get here to where I am today? And that includes a whole lot of cultural and racial and, socioeconomic things. The Broken to Beloved piece includes a more recent history of maybe the last 10 to 15 years. I've been pastoring for over 20 years now, which doesn't seem right. But in 3 of the 4 last environments that I was a part of, I experienced really toxic leadership and spiritual abuse. And so it got to the point, like the first time it happened, you're like, I have no idea what that was, but it was weird. And I'm really glad to be out of there. The second time it happens, especially when it's a second time in a row, back to back, you're like, something's wrong. And I think maybe something's wrong with me. And then it happens a third time and you're just destroyed. It's like, God, I don't understand. What is it about me that this keeps happening? And so it was through my own therapy and counseling, which I've been doing now for the last, 6-ish years, I think, that I gained the language for spiritual abuse and or an understanding of what PTSD is. And when she said, do you recognize that you've experienced trauma? I was like, no, I haven't. What do you mean? And then getting the language for spiritual abuse was a light bulb. It's like, this makes total sense now. I get it. Did I contribute to problems? 100%. Was I the problem? No. And so having a name for that gave me the tools to be like, oh, I can separate myself from the thing because the thing is, when I went into interviews at my last position, I introduced myself as damaged goods. They would ask the question, hey, why should we hire you? Why do you want to be here? And I would just say, actually, I don't want to be here, but you invited me, so I'm here. And you don't want to hire me because I'm damaged goods. So I thought broken was my identity.
Oh, Brian.
And so moving beyond that to recognizing broken is something that happened to me, but it's not who I am.
Yeah. I resonate with that deeply. And I also want, before we jump there, would you be open to touching on some of the socioeconomic, racial, other influences that led you to even pastoring?
Yeah,
The background,
sure.
the story.
Sure, the story before the story. is, and this is interesting because I'm also participating in one of Kurt Thompson's confessional communities. I co-facilitate a group right now, and we are in month 4 out of 6, I think. And I'm also doing story work with Adam Young, and all this stuff. So it's a lot of digging up these things to do a lot of work with.
Yeah.
And what I recognize and notice is a lot of the stories that I write and share have to do with that history. And so, easy example, one of the last stories I shared with the confessional community is this idea that what do you do when the story you want to tell isn't even yours? And you don't really have access to it, because I deeply want to know more about my immigrant parents who came here to America in the 70s from South Korea to make a new life for themselves. They left all of their family behind and came here alone, met here in the States, and then started their own family. And if you know anything about the history of Korea, the 60s and 70s, and then is pretty tumultuous, and then you've got the Korean War, right, in the 40s and 50s, the occupation by Japan, and all these other things happening before. And understanding that now, it makes sense why they don't want to talk about it. Because while my parents sort of lived it growing up, their parents, my grandparents, actually lived the history. For me, it was always just boring. I was like, why is my dad always reading books about the Korean War or watching movies or documentaries? Like all these black and white things. I was like, this is so boring and weird. And now I recognize that I'm at the age where he was doing all that studying and research, and I'm intensely interested and want to know more because it connects me to that history. And Korean culture has a word, Han, that represents this cultural trauma that they all carry together. And it's the trauma of a culture and a nation and a people who collectively went through this thing. And so tapping into that has been a big part of the last 5-ish years for me, and wanting to know more, and yet also kind of getting the doors slammed in my face that when I want to ask my dad, it's like, would you talk about this thing? Or getting him a birthday present of an online, send you a question and start writing your story and put it together in a book. And then my mom calling me saying, why did you send this? He doesn't want to do this. Right? Wow. So I don't get to ever have that story. And I know that there are really traumatic things that happened to him, to his parents and family, that someday when he passes, they will be lost forever. So how do I carry my part of that story of growing up in extremely blue-collar Pittsburgh or extremely diverse Staten Island or finding my way to Philadelphia and all these things? And how did those things shape the way that I see the world? How did him getting called into ministry, going to seminary and then planting a church in Pittsburgh and growing up in that environment for 18 years shape me and cause me to create vows for myself that I'm never going to become a pastor and then go ahead and become one anyway?
Really?
And how does that shape the decisions I make that say, well, if I'm going to do it, this is the way I'm going to do it. Or someday when I have a family, this is the way I'm going to do it. Right? So all of those things, parts of our story and our history shape us. And until we become aware of our own stories and the ways that we shape us, how can we hope to move through life intentionally or more aware or more whole?
There's so many places I want to dig into there.
Well, yeah, it gives a lot of context to your definition of masculinity, holistic masculinity, being that integrity, that ownership of all the parts, the welcoming of all the parts.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for letting us into that side of you. I want to know so much more. I do, though, want, just for our listeners, because I think, like, as we're talking about this, spiritual abuse will be kind of like a theme or a thread because it's so much of the work you do. Would you mind putting some language around that, defining it a little bit to help listeners understand this kind of nebulous term that's even thrown out around a lot, or maybe even put language to something that somebody's experienced that they may have been in a place where you were where they didn't know that's what it was?
Yeah. I really like Janai Alman's definition because it's just so short and sweet. And I don't think she ever wrote it somewhere. I think it was like on Instagram in a story or something like that.
Oh, wow.
But it's just using God's words to dehumanize God's beloved.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
so short and sweet, because there are plenty of like long definitions I could give
Yeah.
you, like misusing or manipulating scripture to influence or control your emotions, thoughts, or behavior. Instead of ministering love and care with grace and truth, they manipulate, domineer, bully, gaslight, intimidate, condemn, shame. It's the holding on to power and control by those in spiritual authority rather than serving with grace and humility. And it can come across as physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse. All of these things come together. And the thing that is so diabolical about spiritual abuse is that most often you went to this environment or went to this person in hopes of receiving care and help.
That's right.
And you thought it was a safe place. And then when it harms you, it doesn't affect just your relationship with that person. It affects your entire view of who God is and how he operates in the world. And it changes so much for you.
Yeah, Brian, welcome to what we are now rehashing in my personal therapy right now. You just kind of like walked
Yeah.
right in the door.
How are you doing right now?
Yeah. I was definitely so interested to talk to you after listening to you talk to Chuck DeGroat a little bit, Michael Cusick. It's just like I feel in my body the overlap. I definitely think that my abuse, to hear you say it, like it can show up as emotional, sexual, all these other things. It is interesting to think about my own story in that context of, this was a youth pastor who I definitely went to for safety. He was a teacher in my homeschool community, and an intern at our church, and significantly older. Sometimes when people think of a youth pastor, they think of someone young, and like I still haven't gotten to. I'm 32, almost 33 now, and I'm still not as old as he was when I met him when I was 11.
Mm-hmm.
And to think of it in terms of like so much of the power dynamic with he and I wasn't created by any of the emotional or sexual abuse. It was all created by the spiritual imbalance.
Mm.
And hearing you say that just then kind of like light bulbed something in me. And I'm a therapist, been doing this work for a while. And it was like, oh, wow, yeah. I mean, ultimately, this does boil down to using God's word to mar the face of God's beloved. That's a Dan Allender phrase he uses that has always stuck with me. But yeah, it's interesting to hear you frame it that way.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And it is so hard because just hearing about it. And so I recognize this for the listeners too. Like just hearing the definitions clearly for maybe the first time can be awfully triggering or activating.
Yeah.
Or suddenly, like you're saying, having that light bulb moment is like, oh my God, that's what happened to me. And I just never had a name for it or never realized it. So I hope that you sense the agency to just step back and take the break or take the breath or hit pause or whatever it is. Yeah, it's a lot and it's hard.
Yeah. Deeply affects my trust of other people. I've recognized it as spiritual abuse in the past, but I kind of almost compartmentalized each part of it as its own form, not necessarily under the umbrella of a greater story of abuse of like, this is spiritual abuse. And under that are these compartments of how that was used to further abuse. It was more like this part of it was this part of it was this, and this part of it was this.
Yeah.
Interesting. It definitely is triggering.
Okay.
Like I can feel it in my body, but it's not like the kind of triggering where I'm taken out. It's just kind of like, oh boy, Brian.
Yeah. Well, and usually that it's so strongly accompanied by a sense of shame for that younger self, for like, how did I fall for that? Or why did I do these things? And I love the work of like Allison Cook and Adam Young, who have given me the language to say, but of course you did. Like, why would you not want that kind of attention from someone you viewed as spiritually mature, from someone who was older, from someone who you thought could be like a mentor, even if you don't have the language for what that is, but someone you look up to who shows interest in you and in developing you? Of course you wanted that. And just that simple phrase has given me so much freedom and grace for myself when I look back at the version that was being abused of like, I stayed at that church for too long. I stayed in that position for too long. And Allison's just like, but of course you did. You had to provide for your family. You guys needed health insurance. Of course you stayed. And I was just like, why did I never think of it that way before, right? I've been carrying this guilt for years. And then it's just when you are able to view that younger version or your past version of yourself and just give them the grace to say, of course you wanted that. You didn't know you were walking into an abusive situation. You didn't know that those things were going to happen. Or even if it did happen before and you were going back, of course you wanted that attention. Of course you wanted that kind of a connection. And are you able to at least extend the grace? And the way Adam Young says, it's like, can you bless that original desire for connection that you had? Can you bless that desire for love or for attention? You don't have to bless the things that happened that came out of it. But of course you went over there again. Of course you got in the car. Of course you went to the office. Of course you went out for like all of these things, whatever those things are, to be able to show just a little bit of grace instead of heaping more guilt and shame.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, I don't know if we talk a lot about it in the show or just with clients. We're doing this in my office, so it's like hard to remember when I've had this conversation, but like that we are made to be known, like to be really known and deeply cared for.
Yeah, known and loved.
Known and loved. And it's hard to be known if we don't take the risk of being seen. It's really hard to be seen whenever we have these parts of our stories where we were seen by somebody and then that was dehumanized or that was abused. That's why knowing our story and doing this work is so important, because we may not take the risk of being seen in a relationship today with somebody that could be deeply healing for those wounds, because it's like that familiar feeling of being seen is connected with this thing that was so harmful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the 4 S's, right? Dan Siegel, Kurt Thompson, they all talk about it, being seen, soothed, safe, and secure. And I think, one of the programs that we offer, kind of the way that Broken to Beloved started, was in October of 2022, I launched a 6-week cohort. And this largely came out of my own therapy and counseling, of my counselor saying, it's like, you are a different man today than the one who walked into my office. And I'm wondering if all these things that you're reading and resources you're collecting might be helpful to someone else too. And so I took the summer to kind of develop this thing. And Broken to Beloved did not exist in any way. I have a coaching practice where I work with the Enneagram with people. And I threw it out to that crowd just to say, hey, I know some of you have experienced something like this. Would you be interested? And immediately had a bunch of people sign up, walked them through it, and have been doing that for the last 3 years now. We've just finished our last group. We've had over 100 people now go through the cohort.
Is this the through cohort?
Through cohort. Yep.
Okay. I love that.
So we've expanded it to 8 weeks. Thank you. And one of the questions, we start with the first week of just identifying as broken. And how do I learn to tell my story? And we end with this idea of belovedness. It's like, how do I recognize and reclaim my belovedness as identity? And one of the questions that came out of that last week from one of our cohort members was, I get it, like intellectually, I get it cognitively. How do I actually know and feel in my body when I'm beloved? And I thought, what an amazing question. And someone else shared this quote from, I forget who the author is, but I think they mostly do family therapy, was this idea of, there are 2 questions that everyone's always asking. Am I safe and am I loved? And if I can't answer the first question yes, the second one doesn't even matter. And so based on that quote, we kind of in real time developed sorry, everyone. You can help me out here. I developed this sort of hierarchy of belovedness, of felt belovedness. And so at the very bottom of that is, do I feel safe? Because if I don't feel safe, nothing else is going to matter.
Nice.
If I feel safe, do I feel connected to myself, to someone else, to a community, whatever that means for you? Can you feel connected to something or to someone? If you do feel connected, then, and I've actually got to look this up now because my brain's going to blank. Sorry.
That's okay.
Here it is. If I feel connected, do I feel trust? Because, connection can come without trust. I know you guys, I'm connected to you. I don't know if I trust you because I don't know you enough. But
Sure.
once we get there, can I feel that sense of trust between us? If that trust is built, can I move to a sense of vulnerability? Can I now offer you something that you can destroy me with, but I'm still going to tell you anyway? And once that vulnerability is built, we are now moving into intimacy, or that being known piece, right? And from there, there's that sense of belovedness. And anytime something underneath there crumbles, the whole thing crumbles.
Yep.
And again, it makes sense why you don't trust people. It makes sense why you don't feel connected or safe or any of those things. And can I work with these pieces to develop these things and recognize, again, not to heap more shame of why can't I feel beloved, but with that sense of grace that says, oh, it makes sense why I don't feel beloved because I really don't know if I can trust anyone.
Yeah.
I love that.
I
that
think
hierarchy.
for us, Brian, I can look at this and see me and Blake's friendship in that hierarchy. So well done. Do I feel safe? Well, we met in 12-step recovery in Sexaholics Anonymous, healing from all kinds of unwanted sexual behavior. There was safety in the fact that we had shared vulnerability in a space. Do I feel connected? Well, yes, we're both in the same recovery group. Do I feel trust? Well, that was something that was chosen for us. It wasn't, I think something we've said on here before is trust often is something that I see people and I see in myself waiting for the feeling of trust before acting on it. And I think for us, I noticed what really helped me was choosing to act in trust on what I knew was a safe connection, then to be able to develop real trust and connection. And that was through vulnerability. And now because of that, we have intimacy. And so I'm hearing you give that hierarchy, and I'm like, I feel like I can see the thread of God taking me through healing connection through means that were not my own. The whole kicking and screaming, dragging me through into safe connection, because I can also still see how I don't really trust in every relationship. I still maintain structures in my life that allow me to just self-reliantly take care of myself so that I don't have to be vulnerable and trust other people to take care of me.
Yeah.
And that's like what I was saying of you walking through the door of what we're working on in my own therapy right now is it's not necessarily these overt, obvious ways to other people that I'm not trusting. It's all these ways that I've put in structures into my life of, even with my wife, the person who I am most connected and safe with, I don't give her the opportunity to take care of me. I don't trust her to take care of me. And so I build this structure of well, I know that you'll be at work this night, so that's when I'll plan my free time thing for me that will fill me up after the kids go down. But if for some reason you get off of work early and you're excited to see me, and then you're confused why I'm not excited to see you, that's because I don't actually trust you to take care of me the same way that I had just planned on taking care of me when you weren't here.
Yeah.
Gross.
Which makes what? No, well, I mean, it feels gross, yes, but also it totally makes sense. because these are the coping mechanisms that we've put in place for ourselves, right? So if that trust isn't there really with myself more than anything, then of course I'm not going to feel that vulnerability when you come in and, quote, invade my space that I had created for myself.
Right.
Because there isn't the trust and vulnerability to say, I've been doing this alone for a long time. So if you would just leave me alone, I'll be fine, right?
Right.
I think
So
it
of
goes,
course it makes sense.
yeah, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the inviting grace and compassion to yourself, because I think it would be really easy for us to be frustrated at or annoyed by the parts of us that struggle to trust, especially when we've been through something where you're like, yeah, it makes sense that it's hard to trust, because the parts of us that have a hard time trusting aren't bad, right? Like they still do keep us, back to that bottom one, they do keep us safe. Do they overwork in certain relationships and situations? Yeah. But ultimately to try to keep us safe. And if we could go to that part for a second, that bottom level of, do I feel safe? That's a really interesting, it's a really great place to start. That word comes up a lot. For me, it comes up a lot in session. And sometimes we have to start with, what does safety even mean? How do you, Brian, because it may be different from Jamie. Maybe there's some general words and things that we could put to the definition of safety, but how do you feel safe? What does safety mean for you? And for some people, when you ask them that question, even asking the question is all of a sudden safe and connected, because nobody's ever asked me. Nobody's ever been curious about, what does safe mean to me? I just thought I have to figure it out based off of what you think it is, which then led to my harm. So, and then we could get really into the weeds of this, right? Do I feel safe with myself? Do I feel safe with you? Because now we're talking about self-regulation and co-regulation, because there are times even with my wife, we're having a conversation, or we're in a little rupture or whatever, a disconnect. And if I am just solely relying on her for me to feel safe so that then we can feel connected, my wheels are just going to keep spinning.
Yeah.
So what does safety look like? And maybe I don't know, maybe the three of us answer this, but what does safety look like within myself? Because if I know that, then I can more accurately assess safety with you, and I'm not depending on you for my safety, because then that's where the waters get really murky.
Yeah. It's such a great question, because I don't think we often do consider it. I think, and especially for people who are struggling with anxiety, and if you've experienced abuse or carry trauma, you've got anxiety. You may not know, because it's this low level hum that's just always there, and it's the water you swim in, but it's there for sure. So what does it feel like to just let go of the breath that you've been holding that you didn't know was there? What does a deep exhale feel like? For me, that's safety. I can let go of that breath I've been holding. And it has a lot to do with, and you guys can help me with the language because I'm not the expert, but it's all about that regulation and the polyvagal theory and vagal, it's being home in that ventral state, right? And it's just knowing that, I can feel my body. I feel like I'm right here, right now, not back in a memory, not anxiously forecasting about something that's going to happen later. It's I'm here with you. I'm here with me. I can feel my butt in the chair and the soles of my feet on the floor, or sitting cross, whatever it is. I can feel my back against the seat and it feels comfortable, or I notice the knot in the lower part of my back and it's uncomfortable, but I feel safe because I know where I am. And then with self, it's that sense of identity again that has so much to do with, am I okay with who I am right now? Because if I'm not, that feeling of not being safe is going to go with me wherever I go. And again, feeling safe to me, I'm learning, is recognizing when I'm in that ventral vagal state and feeling home and regulated and can breathe and be mindful of things and feel present. And anytime I slip out of that and slide down that ladder, I recognize, okay, something else is going on. And as long as I can hold on to that sense of awareness, I can get myself back there.
Yep.
If not, then then the sympathetic kicks in and we're going to reach out for connection somewhere. Hey, does someone see what's happening? Do you see me? Can you help me? Can we co-regulate? And if not, we're going to slide even further down. And it's all those responses that are happening. And I don't know if there's a threshold for me at which point it's no longer safe, because all of those things can happen and still feel safe because I know someone's coming.
That's right.
And that's where that connection piece comes in. But I think for me, that feeling of safety is like, do I feel like I can draw and exhale that deep breath and have the time to do it and do it right here where I am?
And then when you tie in the faith piece of this, right? With the definition of using God's words to dehumanize God's beloved, I've experienced that under certain leadership in a very, I would say, more subtle, nuanced way.
Mm-hmm.
Still impactful, but if we're like comparing things.
Yeah, but Dan Allender was on our show.
Yeah, I know.
He called.
We've
he
said
said
this on,
what's
like,
the
every
most
episode.
ordinary is the most demonic.
Yeah. Or another way he said it, the more subtle, the more satanic. We're
Yeah,
like,
that's
all right,
right.
chill out, Dan.
Yeah.
No, but really, and that is true because it is so much harder to name the harm and the effect of it when it's not as clear. So as you're talking about like being home in your body and being able to like have that awareness and feel your butt on the chair and your feet on the floor, that's such important work. And we primarily work with men, and I'm not generalizing, but it also is just what I see. And so it does sort of ring true that a lot of my clients, when I say, where do you know, like, what do you notice happening in your body? That's like a foreign question. It's like, I don't know. I'm thinking about how I'm nervous. And I'm like, that's not what I asked. Right.
Yeah.
But it's because to be connected and aware of our bodies is not something that we were taught. And then when you add on the dehumanizing of God's beloved, especially if it involves something physical, then we're for sure going to stay disconnected and dissociated from our bodies.
Can you explain a little more clearly what you are asking? Because I think someone listening might be like, I was thinking the same thing of I'm noticing that I'm thinking about how I'm nervous, and they might still not understand the question that you just asked of where are you feeling this in your body?
Oh yeah, that's good. Thanks for. I think I mean, in that example, I just mean like as you're talking about whatever it is you're talking about or thinking about, how aware are you of what is happening in your body? So for me, even an example in this conversation, like there are certain, because it's now more unconscious, like because I intentionally try to notice what's happening in my body, and like the more practice I do at that, the more unconscious it becomes where it's just happening. Like there are certain points in what we've talked about where my breath is a little bit shorter, or my chest feels a little tighter, or my palms start getting sweaty. And all of those are just indicators that whatever we are talking about on the surface is connected to something else. And maybe those are things that need to be like worked through in a therapy session. And like you're saying, just even the awareness of what's happening in my body helps me stay more grounded, and I can like breathe through it, and I can relax my shoulders a little bit. And where I was going was, for a long time, like me and my wife she's on staff at a church. She's actually leaving in 2 months after almost 10 years. So that's going to be a big change for us. But we're still very active and involved in our church community. And it was often where, through a service on Sunday, where I didn't have the language for this, but I would be pretty dysregulated in like just listening to the pastor or in worship, like. And for the longest time, I was mostly, not that this is a good thing to do, but all of what I was doing was just critiquing basically everything else. I was not paying attention to myself. I was critiquing the pastor, the music choice, the the flow of the service, like all this stuff in order to try to make sense of this discomfort that I was feeling because it must be the church's fault. And again, those are important things because some of that stuff can be manipulated. But in this specific context, no church is perfect, but the one that we are a part of right now is pretty, at least they intentionally pursue health in some ways that I haven't experienced. So what I started to realize as I'm like doing this work and paying more attention to what's happening in me is the discomfort and like the dysregulation that I was feeling in these services didn't really have much to do with what was actually happening in these services, but the context of the room that I was in was every Sunday I would go was like just like picking like just a little like poke at all this unresolved stuff related to my faith experience and being under leadership from my story, and not working on that and not like paying attention to it and being curious about it was actually, and I'm not like this is where we're going back to like this makes sense, but it was keeping me from experiencing kind of the goodness of what I could in the present moment, because it was like all this undealt with stuff that was being triggered by the present moment.
And created a lack of safety.
Yes. Created a total lack of safety within my own self and within the context, the setting I was in. And I was partly trying to like rely fully on the setting I was in to try to find some of that safety. And it just was not working.
I think it's interesting that you said you're not an expert, Brian, because the way you speak on this is with such intention and care. It's like that's what an expert
well,
is.
and an expert, like I think we both believe this is why we're doing this whole show, is we're not interested in experts that are experts because they know a bunch of stuff, but because they have experience. Like that's the reason I love Dan Allender. Dan Allender is like the Albert Einstein of psychology, is what I would call him. He's an incredibly smart man, but he also is like, he has a rich involvement in his own story, and that's what comes through what he's teaching. He's an expert on that. And so, yeah, I totally agree. Like you have a lot of knowledge around this, but if you just came on here and just shared a bunch of knowledge, it would be important. But story is what, I mean, the three of us know this. Story is what teaches us. And you clearly have done a lot of work on that. And I think that's why, like the Broken Beloved community, so many people are experiencing deep connection in their own story because you're living out of that place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, I don't think I noticed, like Blake was saying, I don't think I noticed for a long time how unsafe I felt. Or like you said, Brian, that the anxiety is just a low hum all the time. That and it came out similar to Blake's. I'd be hyper vigilant in church spaces. I would be carefully critiquing all the ways that someone sounded like the pastor who harmed me. I would be spending a lot of my time and energy just making sure that where I am now is controlled, and I would call controlled safety when it wasn't.
I think if we want to talk about masculinity again, we've been taught for so long that we're just this whole hustle culture idea that you're just supposed to push through and get it done.
Yeah.
And it's part of why I so appreciate the work of like Andy Kolber, who instead of trying harder and white knuckling our way through life, what if you tried softer? And what if we, again, gave ourselves the grace to like recognize, oh, my body doesn't feel safe in this space. Or, after this abusive situation, I don't think I can go to a church like this again that has no windows, or that has stained glass, or that plays a pipe organ, or that has a rock band, or whatever it is. And you recognize that for yourself and give yourself the grace and the space. You'd be like, not feeling super safe. And then you get to choose, have the agency to choose, do I want to go ahead and go anyway? Or am I just going to back off today and take it easy?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Using the hustle culture analogy in the context of like how we relate to our faith that's pretty good.
It's definitely, yeah.
Good in the sense of it's true.
Yeah, I think I operated in the role of the abuser after, trying to get myself back into church. When the role of abuser was abdicated because I was kind of brought out of that through kind of a wild story of a move of the Holy Spirit. But after I was brought out of that situation, that abusive relationship, I kind of still maintained internally the role of the abuser by kind of continuing this thread of get over it. This is what you need to do. You should be back in church. And even like led to some disagreements with pastors at my current church who were trying softer or differently. And I was the one maintaining the intense theology. I was the one maintaining this like very rigid ideal. And it was actually me who needed to learn safety in myself to be able to have safety there, or safety with softer to be safe there. I maintained a role, and I think the reason I felt so unsafe was because it was just so familiar to me to hold on to a certain message that the message itself felt safe. I use this quote a lot with clients from C.S. Lewis of we're content making mud pies in the slums because we have no idea what's meant by a holiday at sea. And I think that's so true of a lot of my path out of spiritual abuse, and continues to be that I mean, from the ages of 11 to 19, this happened. So for me to try to understand the world now, I've got to have a lot of grace for how I might just have no idea. Like none at all. And so learning safety in my spiritual context has been a lot of like looking at the ideas that I hold true to or get angry about and being like, who taught me that? And have I ever slowed down enough to agree with it? And I think for me, safety has turned into the freedom to be curious. Like for me, that's what safety is. Like you said, taking the deep breath. I notice every time I go into my counselor, who happens to be his therapist as well, whenever I go into his office, my first reaction is to sit back, put my arms out like this, and just take a huge deep breath, because I know, and now I'm recognizing in this moment, what's happening in there is not like I feel the most safe with Arlen, shout out to Arlen, but I feel the most curious in that space. And because I have the freedom to be the most curious there within safety, that's the safest place I have.
That's really good.
Brian, tell us a little bit about, as we start to land, tell us a little bit more about how our listeners, if they have related to anything that we've talked about today, how can they be a part of what you're doing? How can Broken to Beloved practically, like what does that look like to be able to help people as they're journeying through this?
Sure. I mean, if you're looking to partner with us, we're always looking for partners and supporters. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so it's all on the backs of our donors and or just contributions from programs that we run. If you're here looking for the resources, then we have lots of options for you. We referenced the Through cohort. It's an 8-week program that we typically run in February and October. You can go to our website, find the cohort, and sign up for our wait list, and then you'll be the first to be notified when applications are opened. I'm actually in the process of rewriting the whole thing and updating it. I think I mentioned I first launched it 3 years ago. And I based it really on like 6 or 7 different books that I had read, and I've read like 40 more since then. So I wanted to incorporate a lot of the new stuff that I've learned. And so I've been spending the last couple of months like gathering research and data and all kinds of stuff to incorporate and update. That's probably the most impactful program that we run because it's small groups. It's 8 weeks in a row. It's really intensive. And we offer, I think 65% of our members receive scholarships. So it's not something you think you can afford. Please apply anyway and just ask for a scholarship, and we never say no.
And that's
Every
virtual,
year in
right?
January, we run an annual summit. That is, it is virtual. Yep. So what happens is every Saturday you get a bunch of videos that you watch, and then we meet together on Zoom on Thursdays or Fridays, depending on which group you're in. So usually we're running 3 or 4 different groups at a time each season. And then in January, to coincide with Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month, we have our annual virtual summit. And so usually it's 3 or 4 days of about 20 different speakers, authors, experts, therapists, pastors to just answer the question, great, we know what spiritual abuse is and we know that we've experienced, but what now? So it just answers the question, what do I do now? And gives me something really practical. Again, like we were saying earlier, it's not just head knowledge. It's not just more information, but something I can walk away with and actually do. And then coming up this October 10th and 11th in Richmond, Virginia, which is where I'm located, we're going to have our second annual gathering, which is specifically for survivors of spiritual abuse and their advocates who are here to support them to come gather in a safe community and a safe place and learn from people, what do I do with myself? Where do I go from here? And to look around the room and go, oh, I'm actually not alone in this. So last year was the first time we tried to do it. We're going to do it again this year and move it to 2 days, expand it to 2 days. We are getting ready to release our speaker list and everything. But right now, again, there's just kind of a wait list for information. So you can find that on our website as well. We have the weekly podcast that launched last July, so not quite a year ago yet. But we're really excited. I'm actually wrapping up season 2 this week. And then we're going to have a couple of favorite episodes replayed through the month of June. Thank you. July, we'll kick off season 3 with Hillary McBride, and then we'll just kind of go from there. We have a book club that meets every month where we just read through different books and resources that I have. And then usually we read one book every 2 months. This month, we're reading Becoming the Pastor's Wife by Beth Allison Barr, and she's going to come talk to us next week as we wrap up that discussion. And then we'll pick our next book and start all over again. So those are just a couple of ways. You can find all of that stuff on our website, brokentobeloved.org. I'm semi-active on Instagram. It's where I post the most stuff. That's just at Broken to Beloved. I write occasionally on Substack. Same thing, just look Broken to Beloved, and it's all there.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. And the work that you're doing is so important, and grateful for it. Really, truly, it's a gift. I kind of want to end really quick for either of you can answer this, because I've said this to you before, and I know I don't know a ton of your story, Brian, in detail, so you don't have to answer this. But one thing I've said to Jamie after I've learned more about his story is it would be, from the outside looking in, so easy to experience what you experienced and just be like, forget all this. Like, forget God, forget faith, community, like forget all of it. It would be so easy. And I would be like, yeah, that makes sense. And you haven't. Why?
End with a absolutely massive question.
That I didn't tell him I was going to ask. But I think it's important because I've asked you that before, and your answer is very like hopeful and like draws me even closer to God. That's why I ask.
Yeah, I think the reason I can't take credit for the reason I haven't, I think ultimately.
Sure.
I think the reason that I haven't is because I haven't ever felt let go or not pursued by God as I look into my story. As I get into I love again what Dan Allender says, like the particularities of my story is how I do harm to the forces of darkness that would otherwise oppress me. And as I've looked into the particularities of my story, and I wonder if this is similar for Brian, I've just seen I've seen more and more of God's pursuit, where maybe I was blinded to it, but not at His hand. And now in pursuing myself in my story, pursuing trust in myself, pursuing healing, I'm seeing God's hand in it. And so I think that required kind of a hot button topic that maybe we can address another time, a deconstruction for me, but not a deconstruction to give away my faith, a deconstruction to understand how can both of these things be true. And how can I find care and connection with a God on the other side of all this harm?
Yeah, that's good, Jamie. I think for me, it does have a lot to do with hope. It has a lot to do, it's very similar, really, that I personally haven't experienced a God who will let me go, even when I want to. And that is not to shame or judge anyone who chooses to leave their faith or church. I love to quote Mark Twain. He says, "A cat that sits on a hot stove lid won't ever sit on a hot stove lid again, but it probably won't sit on a cold stove lid either." And so for people who choose to go, I totally get it. Like, I've wanted to. I've had my phases of let's burn it all down. I've wanted to leave flaming bags of dog poop on front steps and just ring the doorbell and run away.
Sure.
And those are all valid feelings. And I still feel like that there is a church that is beautiful, and it didn't have to be this way, and it shouldn't be this way, and it is. And I don't have to pretend that it isn't, but how do we walk through faith with our eyes wide open, and again, to move towards that wholeness and integration of all of these things rather than pretending they don't exist, right? If sunlight is the best disinfectant, how do we shine a light on all these dark places so that the church can be more beautiful, so that we can be more beautiful and whole and beloved and all of these things? And so for that, that's what I long for.
I really like, I did find you more recently, and it feels so applicable. And I even have parts of me that as I try to engage in this work, I have parts of me that are so resistant because they're so tired of, and maybe somebody who's listening will relate to this, I'm so tired of having to do the healing that someone else caused the harm of. It feels like having to, it feels like a long journey to repair something that I didn't ask for. And so I think maybe even as I knew we were going to be recording with you, I think those parts of me that were resistant to it, that are so tired, kept me from engaging as much in it. But I just want to say thank you for doing it, because as I welcomed those parts in and said, it's okay to be tired and let's listen, it's just so nourishing just hearing your work and your words and what you are living out through Broken to Beloved. It's a real gift. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for being with us, Brian. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us.
Yeah, we're glad you're here. Keep coming back. You're worth it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode. Listen, we're working on some really practical resources to help you connect more deeply with yourself and others. So if you head over to our website, 3percentco.com, you can learn more about that. The link will be in the show notes. And this is the part of the show where we ask you for some help. Listen, we don't have a big fancy production team. We're recording these in my therapy office in between sessions and in the margins of our life. We just really believe in the message that much. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and rarely would I take the time to review and rate a show, just because honestly, I forgot. It wasn't until we started doing this show that I realized doing that actually really does help these platforms notice our show and get the word out. And so if any of this is impactful to you, we would love it if you took a second to leave us a review, rate us, or if you want to just do it the old-fashioned way, text this link to a friend and say, hey, let's talk about this episode. Whatever you do, make sure to follow us on whatever platform you're listening to so you never miss an episode. We're really grateful you're here, and we'll see you next week.
So let's be honest.